All right, we are going live. Here we are. My name is Alec Cox, and I'm going to be speaking about the troubles with Genesis as far as atheists are concerned. Atheism is not really, it's a made up word. A being anti, theist meaning a god, so they're against any god. And they can say whatever they want, but there is a lot of problems with the beginning of things, and that's why I'm beginning with Genesis, the creation, and then going through. There's many people out there that have problems with Genesis because they read it and they're not really reading it. They're just verse sniping. One of my pet peeves is verse sniping. You see, the Bible, especially the Old Testament, was not written with any verses or chapters. Those came a lot later. They were separated into the Torah, which is the first 5 books under supposedly Moses wrote those, and then you have the prophets and the law and the prophets, and then you have intermediary stories, a lot of genealogies. If you ever have any questions about Genesis chapter 5 genealogy, Genesis chapters 10 genealogy, you can go to First Chronicles and pretty much hammer those out. Adds a little bit more information, and that is why I believe that Moses copied the book of Genesis. It wasn't given to him per se, word for word by God, but I do believe that he, being part of the Egyptian royalty, as he was adopted by the Pharaoh at the time through his daughter that found Moses in the brush next to the river in a little makeshift boat. And then he was raised educational wise with the largest library in the world at the time, which was in Egypt. So it had writings, copies of writings, many different aspects to learning. And it has been found. There's some really good information on that, which I'll go over a lot later, not this one, but that Hebrew is actually the first written language. It's actually the first alphabet. So everything else was Pictionary, stickmen, and different types of things. And we can see how the progression of the written word up until Moses was then put into a more modern, which would have been 1800 years after the flood, put into more modern sciences and things like that he would have learned. So I'm just going to read I tried to keep it short, but this is something that I wrote 15 years ago. And basically it's based off the ontological argument. It's in light of human events from the beginning. Then we'll start with Genesis. So information is true if it corresponds to reality. That's one of the big things. Reality. What is reality? Everybody tries to think that we're in a matrix since Neo was around. Neo being a type of Messiah. Where did all this Messiah come from? That's what I'm going to get into with this. Anyway, this is basically first philosophy thought. Kind of a compilation of Rene Descartes, Anselm, and a couple other philosophers that came about from the early years up until about 1400s, so about the 15th century AD. So in the light of human event, the predecessor to the invocation as to man's cognitive value and mankind's primary source of moral justification, and thus moral laws derived and formulated, I must postulate that man has never created ex nihilo, out of nothingness, without an originator of the idea from an outside source of any kind. So you have your a posteriori, a priori, and so if, man cannot create anything without something already be available to create that substance with. And this is what we see in science a lot. We hear a bunch of, oh, we found something new. Well, it was around, they just discovered it. So I'll get into the a posteriori and the a priori later, give the definitions, but I'll continue. To suggest that mankind originated the appearance of God or a pantheon of gods in order to control a godless population not only strips the power of leaders of mankind, but in doing so subverts and supplants the ruler's authority. That is to supersede a ruler that already has the power of authority over the population. This is a great contradiction to the secular humanist and even the theist that is supplanting his or herself as all-powerful and all-encompassing of knowledge. We don't know everything, just plain and simple. I never would admit that I know everything. Can't even fit it in my 3-pound brain, all of it. That's why I have to read this. Otherwise, I'd be able to recite it. So thus, there is to be an all-knowledgeable, all-supreme entity that translated this a priori to mankind cognitive value. For without the notion of a supreme entity, people would not, by their own reasoning, allow the subversion of their own conscience without prima facie extreme evidence of the superior moral deity to supplant their notions of law and moral justification, especially individual morality. A lot of people have their own takes on what's moral and what's not. For man to take a role as a god, there must first exist one who mankind must supplant. The creation of gods, the first philosophy, to take a god of himself or herself, must come from the originator of the first philosophy. That's knowledge, seeking of knowledge. Whom would contain the knowledge then deduced from the primary source of a supreme being. So you've taken knowledge from a supreme being, you put it into your craft, whether it's a ruler or any other type of a vocation, and now you have laws. For this is not one shred of evidence. There's not one shred of evidence that has been produced from the past, present, or future of any witness to the process of evolution. But in the deviated prima facie evidence of creation and the Creator's blueprint, as shown, mankind's cognition through the cognito ergo sum, I think, so therefore I am, Rene Descartes. The summarization of meditations of first philosophy, mankind is just the expounder of all the tools for invention. So man already had the tools to invent more things, why we have computers these days. Although they did find some early on computers under the ocean in the Aegean that could actually calculate the stars so that they could travel. So to think otherwise is to demolish all preconceived thought throughout history, as Hitler and Stalin tried to accomplish. So why I bring up Hitler and Stalin, they took total control over their countries, and they tried to take God out of the population and made their government the God and the final authority. We can see the effects of communism today, as we see people getting away from God and not treating each other with love, but only their little small population. So basically what I'm trying to invoke is basically you can't make something out of nothing. And man didn't start with nothing. Man was on the sixth day. We'll get to that in a moment. So there's nothing to suggest that moral justifications were derived solely on the basis of astute men and women, collectiveness, councils, since not one ruler would be willing to undermine one and one's own authority over a population. It would be illogical. An example of a light bulb and birds. How do we get a light bulb? Well, you have to get the incandescence. You have to get everything, the glass to fit around it. Birds, that's just goes on from the creation. We can't make a bird. Birds make birds, but we can't make birds. We can fly like a bird now because we learned off of the birds. Am I correct? The next thing is, hence, the logical justification for the primary existence of an original author to pattern moral justification of a population, and thus foremost existence of a supreme being that was superior to all of mankind and creation. So not just his creation of men and creation, but all things. So even outside, if there was another realm, say another dimension, he would also be the creator of that. And maybe we found some, because they said there's 5 dimensions now. Some say as much as 9. So thus the foremost existence of a supreme being that was superior to all of its creation. And any antagonism or dissent from this would have to expound and trump the philosophy of both nature and science. So you'd have to be above all, knowing all of nature. You'd have to be above all of the knowledge that we gain from science in order to outdo what's already been found. And there are some smart people in this world, but none that smart. In which conclusion gives a justification for a preeminent essence that is real and moreover exists alongside the outstanding nature of creation, of all creation. Hence, proof of the existence of God and his supremacy over all creation, to the glory of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. I begin with that before I start with Genesis, because the fact is there has to be an understanding of Genesis 1:1 before you actually go into Genesis 1:1. It's not just that God created the heavens and the earth, in chapter 1, verse 1 of Genesis. What was the thought to do this? I mean, we only get thoughts of things that are already existing and how we can probably implement a better way to do these things. And what I'm trying to get at is that we're not of our own volition. So basically, there's a lot of problems. I'm just going to start reading at Genesis 1. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So what we consider God would be the all-supreme being, the one and only. And no atheist can deny that there is something that started something. So you can't have 0, then go to 1. You have to have 1 and then go to 1, 2, 3. 0 is not a digit. So in Genesis 1, we have basically all of the power of the supreme being what I would call Yahweh. I am that I am. So you go to verse 2, and the earth was without form and void. Tohu bohu. Without form and void could mean anything. There's a lot of conjecture that something went wrong and had to be redone. It was scrubbed. But God is perfect, so nothing would have been scrubbed as such. He did not destroy the earth during Noah's flood completely. He basically took down the whole surface of the earth. My recollection is that there were only high hills. There were no mountains. Mount Everest didn't exist at the creation. That was after the flood because of the plate tectonics and also the movement, volcanoes going off. And we even have witness of that today, where down in Mexico, a guy's farm, he was out there just farming just like a regular person. And all of a sudden, a 4,000-foot volcano just erupted in his backyard. And it actually happened in less than 3 hours. So, I mean, that's documented. Nobody ever talks about that. It's, out of the nowhere, all of a sudden there's a volcano. And when you get to the second part of, 2b, chapter 1, verse 2b, and the Holy Spirit moved upon the face of the waters. So the Holy Spirit moved upon the face of the waters. So it wasn't just void, it had water. I mean, there's no connection between nothing. There was something. So we just want to say it was water. I have a theory on that. We'll get to that in the next couple episodes. And then God said, "Let there be light." And this is interesting. What is light? What is light? I mean, we have a flashlight. We throw out the flashlight. We have stoplights, green, yellow, red. We have all sorts of lights. But what is light? Can you hold it in your hand? You can shine it on your hand, but can you hold it in your hand? What is light? Light is one of the most brilliant things so that we can see during the day. We have to either have a candle or something like that for night because we don't have the sunshine. But what is light? I mean, we've had plenty of people, what's the speed of light? And we'll get into that. God saw that the light was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. The first day. We're going to say it's a literal 24-hour day? I am. I mean, you could say it was 1,000 years, but did it take them 1,000 years to create light and shine it and break the morning from the night, the darkness from the light? Are we actually going to go through that whole mental gymnastics in order to say, oh, that was 1,000 years that it took them to create light? That was the first day, because it says the evening and the morning. Now, I'm going to go off on a tangent here. In the Hebrew, the day actually began the night before. So you had, so let's say it's 6 o'clock, which is evening. 6 o'clock is now the next day. So right now it's 6:45 Pacific Standard Time. I live in California, and it's June 28th. So right now, by the Jewish calendar, it's the next day. So that's why it's evening and morning. That creates a whole 24-hour because you don't have to count the second evening, right? So you have evening from 6, and then you have the morning, let's say from 6 a.m. and meridian time. We have then the rest of the day until it becomes sunset, and then we have the next day. So by Jewish calendar, we're already a day ahead. But because times and dates were changed, things like that, we count the 12 o'clock. Midnight is what we call it. 12 o'clock is the beginning of the day, when in actuality, it was 6 about 6 hours earlier. So in verse 6, it says, "And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters." So we already know that the Holy Spirit was hovering over the waters. So in the midst of the waters. It's interesting. What is space outside of our firmament? Interesting. And then it divided the waters from the waters. So that wasn't like dividing a lake from a stream, or a lake from an ocean, or dividing oceans. Because if you look at a world map, or you just you scroll out a world map, it's a bit elongated, or just go get a globe. The Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean are the same exact body of water. So you can have, the Aegean Sea, you can have the Mediterranean Sea, you can call it whatever you want. It's still the same body of water as the Atlantic Ocean. And then you go down underneath South America, it's the same body of water. My brother says Pacific is from pacifiers, and the Atlantic is just the Atlantic. I don't know what that means, but so, and God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. So we have 2 days, 24-hour days, because now we have light. So the beginning of light was the first day. I'm going to go with the 24-hour day because the sun and the moon aren't even there yet, but it still has to be in cohesion. So now we'll go to the third day. This is where it all gets kind of mixed up. And God let the waters under the heaven be gathered together in one place. As I said, we only have one ocean. And let the dry land appear, and it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, and herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after its kind. So you don't get an apple out of an orange seed. You don't get an orange out of an apple seed. So it's a kind. And then we go into the animals. So this is the plants, right? Whose seed is going to grow on earth. And the earth brought forth the grass, and the herb yielding seed after its kind, and the tree yielding fruit whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good, and the evening and the morning were the third day. So there is light. Where's the light coming from? Because this is the clincher right here. So we've had day 1, day 2, day 3. Now we're going to go to day 4. And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night. So kind of taking away the light that was shown at the beginning, and he's replacing it with his creation out in space. So divide the night and the day from the night, and for them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also, by the way. That's always intrigued me. Oh, by the way, he made the stars. And yet we have astronomers that are totally just bewildered by stars. And yes, it tells us the seasons and the times. You can navigate through the seas looking at the oceans and the reflections and things like that of stars and distant galaxies, things like that. You can look up most nights unless you live in a big city where the street lights drown out the, but if you go out to like a national park or something like that, the star is just littered with lights up in there. And it always amazed me that, oh, by the way, I did make the stars, but the sun and the moon have something going. I'm going to stop right there for a second and go off on a tangent. You have a lot of worshipers of the moon goddesses. The moon has always been a goddess, never been a god. Okay, so if you look at Islam, El-Al is actually the moon goddess. And if you look into the Babel tablets, along with, I think even in the Epic of Gilgamesh, I just recognize people. Hey, Jerome, what's up? Let's not believe in a literal 6-day creation. You end up like Sky Out, confused. That's true. So let me get back on this track. We haven't even reached the flood yet, but I do have to preempt this. After the flood, Noah, his wife, they stopped having children after they had Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Not going to get into everything on that moment, but what we have is we have Shem, Ham, and Japheth, which with their wives are going to create their own nations. Now we know that Shem stuck around pretty much the area where father was. Japheth lived in Shem's tents, and then Ham, his one of his grandsons was cursed. That was Canaan. And we found out about Canaan later on in Exodus as they took over the promised land that was given to Abraham. So a lot of them had moon gods. Get into the first one. You can call it Inanni. You can call same one Ishtar. You can call the same one Astarte. Those were the goddesses of early, which had to have come from something else, as I said earlier in this. Something has to come from another thing previous to it, whether by experience or not experience, just by deduction or induction. You can find out that something was realized off of something else. Electricity has been around, but they did not harness it. So basically, you have the battle between Edison and Tesla, AC versus DC. And then I found out AC was a lot better than DC because, the different experiments that were done. But those were not invented. There was electricity previous to that. Thousands of years ago, they had electricity. They just didn't really harness it into light bulbs and street lights and trains and automobiles and things like that we do now. So you had the ability to find something out with something that already existed. And this is where I'm going with why atheists have such a problem with this, because they're stuck in the today. They don't look back, and they believe that everybody's unintelligent up until the 19th century. It was the 1800s. For those that don't understand, the number of the century always precedes the number of the actual calendar. So in the 1800s, which is the 19th century, people weren't that smart. Yet you have most of the highest scientific everything, the explosion going on in the 1800s. I mean, if it wasn't for submarines in the Civil War, where did they come up with the idea of submarines? You can go see them right now. Just go to Charleston, South Carolina. You can see two of them. I think one's called the Tamarack and the other one's another one. They used submarines in the Civil War. But where'd that idea come from, and how'd they get this? And now we have, I'm not going to mention what happened underwater, find the Titanic, but I'm not going 4,000 feet down in anything. I don't care what you got. 4,000 feet down, the pressure down there is just unbelievable. So something comes from another thing. And that kind of gives the position of something had to start the ball rolling. You can call it the unmoved mover of Plato. You can call it whatever you want. Something had to get the ball rolling. Where did the light come from? Well, obviously, we read in Genesis first chapter that God created the light. Now we'll go on with Yahweh, but light actually means a lot more, and we'll have to get into that later, how much light means. Light, it's like the Enlightenment period. Why do we call it the Enlightenment period of the 1800s? It's just totally unreal that people can say, they were Neanderthals back in the 1700s or the 1600s, when you have some of the greatest philosophers coming out of, at that time in the early 1400s that still can't be taken apart today. Some of the greatest minds, 1400s. I mean, we're talking 600 years ago, and people all they're doing is just robbing from those people, and then building upon it. I use the word robbing because that's what they do in science today. They basically take an old failure and then they rebox it, put a nice little bow on it, and it's still a failure, but they say, oh, look what we found. And this is where I start getting into the Richard Linsky fraud, number one. You can find it. So 22 years, and then he handed it off. Richard Linsky was doing the E. coli test, the long-term E. coli experiment, trying to find out if something new could happen through evolution over that period of time, because it only takes 20 minutes for an E. coli to produce another E. coli, either asexually or sexually. Try it with fruit flies, but I'll stick with the Linsky. The motivation of that, I'm just going to cut to the chase, money. Number one, money, because we've known since the late 50s, probably middle 50s, we've known that Escherichia coli can live off of citrate. But there's problems with that. Number one, you have to feed it to them. Okay, they just don't go out searching citrate, and you have to isolate the E. coli with the citrate. So that is their only food source. Okay, but what happens is, they can live off it. And Linsky wants to call it fitness because now it lives off citrate. Well, I can show you many papers where E. coli lived off citrate, but they stopped it because what happens is, number one, the E. coli loses its ability to move around with the flagellum. It basically has to take away from its ability to move so it can live off of the citrate that's in the petri dish with it. What happens is they live, but also their membranes get thin and they don't last very long, but they do live for a short time on it. The other side of that is you have those that live off of lactose, glucose, and all the other better sugars, but they found this one way of being able to make a big, huge deal out of it, because $6 million a year. $6 million a year. Most labs come already done. He didn't grow his own E. coli. He got a lot of it from frozen E. coli all around the United States. University of Michigan, or Michigan State University, is not the only university that has stored coli in a deep freeze. All right, Long Beach State, just a couple blocks down from where I live, has it. University of Alabama has it. University of Houston has it. You've got Baylor that has it. You've got it. It's already frozen. You have to grow it. So for 24 years, $6 million a year. Calculate that up. Lab assistants are free for the most part. Labs are free for the most part. You section it off. University gets a grant, feeds the money. So let's say you only took a third of it, $2 million a year for 24 years. Let's just take that down. So would you do a study for $10 million over 20 years? Anybody in the chat? So 20 years, you're guaranteed every year $1.2 million. Would you do it? That's the thing. You've got a lot of motivation because of money. And that's what we have with Zelensky. So he didn't get the E. coli from nothing. He didn't create a new strain of E. coli. He did not do anything that somebody hadn't done since the mid 1950s. Okay, so we're talking, 50 years ago, almost 60 years ago, that people already knew what was what was going to happen, and yet they packaged it in a new, nice, shiny box, put a nice little ribbon on it, and said, "Hey, we now have evolution." And any biologist wants to debate me on this, go right ahead, because I'll shred you. You look at it, and that's all they got. I'll even show you some of my uncle's work where they shredded that, because what they were looking at was adolescents' problems with membranes on food. So basically, they're a cell, single-celled, and what happens is they will lose their membranes and thus die under certain conditions. And they've done everything just like fruit fly with E. coli. You don't want it getting out. That's the major problem. So I diverted on that just to go on about, we can take anything we want in this world. Cat and a dog are not going to mate. A snake and a bird are not going to mate. But there are certain ones that can mate with certain ones, and they're probably what a kind is. I don't like the term species. I really don't like the term kind, because kind, if you look at the actual etymology of what a species is or what a kind is, it breaks off into it can be family or it can be genus. It's above species anyway. So they really need to restructure a little taxonomy of things. And when you get into education, and you're learning this in Bio 101 or whatever you're doing, you have to study for the test. If you don't study for the test, you're not going to pass the test. So in order to pass the test, to move on, to get your degree, you have to study what they want you to study. You don't just start off writing your thesis. Well, I did. But you just don't start off writing your thesis, in your first class. And the reason being is because you have to learn everything before you can, solidify your thesis, so you can graduate with your PhD or whatever you want to, whatever your thing is that you want to get out of it. And then you got to be a teacher's assistant and work in a lab and things like that. Generally no money until you become a Richard Lenski, who then gets $6 million a year for his studies. That's a lot of money when you already have the information, and E. coli costs nothing to grow. Zero. You don't have to keep it in a certain, incubator or anything like that. You can just have it at regular, normal room temperature, and they're going to live. You can go to the grocery store. There's probably some on your lettuce right now. You just have no idea because you can't see it. Sorry. So let me go and start with the next verse, because we already know that the stars were also. And this kind of gets me into where the animals were about ready to get. So, and God set them in the firmament, talking about the lights of the heaven, to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and divided the light and the day from the darkness. And God saw that it was good, and the evening and the morning were the fourth day. So we have plants on day 3. We have photosynthesis started on day 4. So if you want to go thousands of years, I don't see the plants doing much without photosynthesis. And that's how things are done with plants. That's how they grow. That's how the seeds grow, everything. So in verse 20, it starts, and God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life. The fowl, so we're talking about birds, fowls, made out of the water, that may fly above the earth and in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly, after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, fill the waters and the seas, and let the fowl multiply in the earth. And the evening and the morning were the fifth day. Well, we want to go about thousands of years. Okay, so we have the birds out of the water, and we also have the whales. But apparently, whales came from a dog-like creature that wanted to learn how to swim. I don't know. I don't know all about that. I've never seen it. I've never seen any proof of it. And dinosaurs are not even mentioned yet, because the land animals haven't been taken off, and they're reptiles, and they're land animal for the most part. Yeah, so, but birds are dinosaurs. Birds are dinosaurs. And this is why atheism disagrees with the Bible, because it totally doesn't work with their ability to get birds from dinosaurs. Not just that, now we're going to get into the day 6. This is the grand finale of creation. God said, Let the earth bring forth living creatures after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, which would be bugs, little whatevers, and the beasts of earth after his kind, and it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth after his kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good. God said, Let us, there's that Elohim again, make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish and the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image, gave them power over every creeping thing on the earth, which we still, that's why we have pets. I even saw a monkey pet the other day down at the beach. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he, him, male and female, created he them. Now I'm going to stop right there because it mentions the female. And a lot of people have a problem with chapter 2, and things like that, because they think it's a separate type of a creation, but it's not. It's just kind of like a revision in the garden, because Adam was created first, and we're going to get to that here. Still day 6. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Now, replenish, a lot of people say, oh, see, that means back in the chapter 1, verse 2, there was some trouble, and there was plenty. Why is he replenishing the earth? Well, I'm reading from the King James Version. Replenish, you can just Google it. It means to not refill, but to fill. It only became refill later on. It's just like a lot of different, older terms, things like that. And I really don't like the Living Bible Standard versions and all that stuff, the way they even put it, because it makes it even more complicated. And so they want them to multiply, husband and wife, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish in the sea, and over the fowls of the earth, and every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree, in which is the fruit, tree yielding seed, to you it shall be for meat, and to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is the breath of life. I have given every green herb to meat. So a bunch of food. God saw everything was made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the 6th day. So God creates man in his own image, 6th day, creates all the land animals, but we have the birds. And that's where we get into chapter 2. I'm not going to do that right now, because now we're going to be getting into some other things. Um, where's the where'd that thing go? Not seeing that. Hang on, we'll be right back. It's right here. All right, I'm just going to use this slide because I had it before, but it has all the right pictures. So we have the creation. I'm going to get to the flood. There we go. All right, so after the flood, the sons of Noah started to have children, grandchildren, things like that. So on Ham's line, he had Cush, and then Cush had Nimrod. So Nimrod would have been Noah's great-great-grandson. And Noah would have been Nimrod's great-great-grandfather. So Nimrod followed after Cush. And it's kind of convoluted in this, but Semiramis, because people lived longer, Semiramis was both Cush's wife, Nimrod's mother, but also Nimrod's wife after Cush died. But later, Semiramis and Nimrod had Tammuz. Now we can find Tammuz, also known as Tamuzi. Funny thing is, though, the name Semiramis doesn't really happen anymore because now you have Ishtar and Inanna. Ishtar and Inanna are the same person as Semiramis. So just like any hierarchy of a royalty, what you have is basically a perpetuation of somebody's life. And I'll get into later with Nimrod's death, Cush's death, who did their thing. So, like I mentioned before, with the moon goddesses, because they see the sun as being a god, like Ra, sun god. And then you have the goddesses being the moon goddess, which would have been Diana, the same Ishtar, which is Semiramis, and Isis for Egypt. So you have a lot of things. So even up in the time of Solomon, sent out after Ashtaroth. That's another name for Ishtar or Astarte. It's just the goddesses of the Sidonians, which Sidonians, if you look at it from Sidon and Tyre, were pretty much sea-dwelling people. And they just called their goddesses and gods by different names, but they're the same, in the same lineage. And the idol of the Amorites, and Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He went after other gods, which is, third commandment. So have no gods before me. No idols, no anything like that. And these are little pictures of after the flood. And we'll get to that later about how Easter came out of that. And it's not from Ishtar, it's just a coincidence. But Easter is a pagan holiday, by the way. Nisan the 17th. Nisan being the 7th month. Now it's the first month under the religious calendar. It's when we have Passovers on Nisan 14th. 3 days later, you have the Feast of First Fruits. And the Feast of First Fruits can fall on any day, just as Passover can fall on any day. So we're talking about a literal 24-hour day because plants couldn't survive without the sun, if it was thousands of years. And they think that that's a mistake. And by no means is that a mistake. It's actually to confound the wise, which God is foreknowledge is a good thing. Wish I had it. Experiential and really bad on my guessing. Otherwise, I would be in Vegas every day just picking the numbers. So anyway, you've got all of these things that kind of envelop into it. So I'm going to stop there talking about that. But a lot of atheists, Andrew Cumming being one, has problems with Genesis. I'm sure it has something to do with scientific, but that's man. And like I said before, there had to be something before in order to have something later. It just didn't pop out of the ground. And any one cell, it wasn't even a human cell that came out, like not even an amoeba that came out, something that would have probably passed away if it didn't live in its environment, and it had to find another mate. If it was asexual production, still wouldn't have lasted. Just the toxicity, if you want to go into the evolutionary world of things millions of years ago. Too hot, too cold, Goldilocks zone. There's a lot of problems with really a lot of the science. Go back to the Lenski thing. $6 million a year for 24 years. Do the math. Do the math. And the university made a lot of money off that, which it didn't have to do it. I mean, you had University of Houston do it. You also had Baylor University do it, both in Texas. Long Beach State did it. You've had many universities do it. But Michigan State decided they wanted to do it, and they fooled everybody because you got to write a paper, everybody's using it, but those that are using it have not read it. They have not read it. They just use it. Cliff notes are a bad thing. Spark notes, if you want to call them that this day. I don't know what you call them. But when I was in school, they were called Cliff's Notes. When my kids were in school, they were called Sparks Notes. So the thing is, with generations, now you can just watch a YouTube on it, download anything off of the internet. So you really don't need any of those. All the synopsis is right at your fingertips on a phone. So these three right here are interchangeable. So Isis, Horus, Set. Isis, Horus, Set. Right? Or you could call it Diana, and you can call it Cupid. Right? Kind of like a little Cupid guy, right? And Dionysus, I guess that's the next one. All right? Call that Nimrod. So there's, and it says it right here, Nimrod, the mighty, king of Kish, right, which is Cush, king of Summer, Sumeria, Sargon of Akkad, and a whole bunch more. Nimrod, the son of Ham, grandson of Cush, great-grandson of Noah. It just goes on and 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 on. So if you go to JSTOR.org, it's pretty good. It's a little bit outdated. Then you have the husbands of Semiramis, who Semiramis is also Ishtar. Oh, Queen of Heaven. I'll end on that. Queen of Heaven. So obviously there would have been stories going in through from the flood. And I'm going to propose something, which I believe that the written language was pre-flood. Written language to get all of the inscriptions and things like that, pictographs, whatever they were going to use. Basically, the pictographs and things like that were obviously kind of what we see in Chinese language, early Egyptian hieroglyphics, glyphs like Epic of Gilgamesh, that if they hadn't found the Rosetta Stone, they'd still be looking for what the language was. They wouldn't have figured it out yet. So something comes from something. The only reason that we can read those languages is because of the Rosetta Stone. And that's exactly how they deciphered the Egyptian. And that's how we know that the Hebrews had the first alphabet and written with pen and paper language. And I'm going to propose something right now and close with this. We're going to get to the flood pretty shortly. I don't need to go through the garden thing and all that. I'm going to hit right at the flood. What happens is you have the flood. Everybody perishes. 8 people on a boat, which is kind of intriguing that the pictograph in Chinese is a boat with 8 people on it. You also have the ability to, multiply. Everything's fresh. It's brand new. It's not the same as it was. Then you have, the 3 boys go off with their wives, who would then be called queens if you want, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Were they triplets? That's a good question, because Noah was 500 years old before the flood, and he gave birth to all 3 of them 100 years before the flood, or thereabouts, 98 years. So the flood was only a year. Shem was 98 when he gave birth, and or he didn't give birth, but his wife gave birth. Same with Ham, Ham and Japheth. So I'll go with the triplets thing until somebody proves me otherwise. It's also backed up by First Chronicles. You can look at the early after the flood. It keeps with the same thing. Doesn't say that, because it gives a direct age of Noah when the flood came and when the flood ended. And so it was 98 years or whatever you want to say, or 100 years. The kids were 100 years old, 98 years old, 100 years old, whatever. The other part is that after the flood, they would have dispersed into their areas, and Ham wasn't cursed, but his great-grandson was cursed. And, obviously he didn't feel right. Shem got the birthright. And I think it's kind of the same story as Esau and Jacob, where Jacob got the birthright he got it by tricking. However, where did he come up with that idea? That idea had to come from something else. So I'm going to trick Esau, who's a great warrior. That sounds familiar. Nimrod, Cush, great warriors. But the thing is, you have Ham, went off, and Cush, his son, would have taken over for him. Doesn't say that, but that would have been the birthright, because the birthright was taught the other side of the flood. And then you have on the other side of the flood, in the new world, what you have is a kind of a mix-up. They're still living long ages. Shem lived long enough to see Abraham. If you look at the dates and things like that, Noah lived quite a long time. See the birth of Abraham, and he was in the land of Chaldees, which is Babylon, Babel. If you look at First Chronicles, also about Abraham's father Terah, and what he did. He made idols for Nimrod. A lot of people don't know that. That's a shame. So they were of the line of Shem, and that's why God chose them. It's a chosen line out of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, because Shem got the birthright. Whether he was the firstborn, secondborn, or thirdborn of the triplets, it doesn't matter. Noah chose him over Japheth and Ham. And that's where we get into firstborn. The firstborn is rarely ever the birthright in the Bible. You have Noah getting off boat, You got Shem, who says Japheth the elder. All right, says it right there, Japheth the elder. And so Shem was younger by minutes or a day, I don't know. But I believe that they were triplets, and just like Jacob and Esau were twins. And, they got off the boat. And so Shem had the birthright. And then guess who he gave the birthright to next? Which is kind of interesting. Would have been his firstborn son. But then you go off into Abram. He was given the right by Shem. Interesting. And then Isaac, he was not the firstborn. Ishmael was, but he was the firstborn so he had preeminence. So birthright only means preeminence. It's very close, though. So Isaac passed it on to Jacob. And then Jacob, lo and behold, he didn't give it to Judah. Who did he give the birthright to? Ephraim, Joseph's second. Why? Because Joseph was the firstborn son of Rachel, his first choice. So the birthright is just as much up to the father as it is but it has nothing to do with who's firstborn. And that is exactly if you go all the way to Colossians chapter 1, where it says Jesus Christ was firstborn of all creation. It means he has preeminence of all creation, because then the chapter 1 verse 15 goes on to say that Jesus Christ made everything, and in him everything consists. Look up the word consist and the etymology on that, the English language, where it comes from. Consist means keeps it running. Your every breath, I'm going to end on this, your every single breath is held by Jesus Christ. Even while he was nailed on the cross, your every breath, everybody's breath. Now your car runs because Jesus Christ, because you need oxygen breath, right? You need oxygen to run your car. Even hydrogen has oxygen in it. Not just saying it's oxygen, it's everything. So I'm going to end on that and see how it goes, and then I'm going to start up. We'll get better as this goes along. Thank you very much. It's been about an hour and 12 minutes. But anyway, you guys, I'll see you all later. Thank you very much.